Hey guys, and welcome back to Beauty in the Bookcase, where we take a book and we make a look. Sadly, theater month is finally coming to an end, but that does not mean that I will not be reviewing any more plays. It just means, I'll be going back to novels and stuff like that as well. So when the month started, I said that I was going to do 2 classic plays and 2 contemporary plays. So I am going to finish this out with a play that I got to see premiere at the Abbey Theatre when I was living in Ireland, called Come On Home by Philip McMahon. And the reason I wanted to do this play, even though it's not, super well known and everything, is because it was one of those things that has stuck with me. And I remember leaving that theater and thinking, that was such a brilliantly written story. And yeah, I wanted to share it with you guys and sort of talk about it and maybe introduce you to it and introduce to a playwright you might not know. So Philip McMahon is a Dublin-based playwright. He is also the co-director of a theater and pop culture company called This Is Pop Baby, and he has written a few plays actually. Among them, Town is Dead, Alice in Funderland, and of course, today's chosen work, Come On Home. So Come On Home is a story about Michael, a man returning to his small rural hometown in Ireland after 20 years living in London. When he was younger, Michael actually joined the seminary, but he ended up dropping out. And at the same time, he also came out to his family, which led to his father becoming really angry and essentially disowning him, kicking him out of the house and telling him he couldn't come back, which unfortunately is the case for a lot of young people. So after that, Michael ends up moving to London after meeting a man by the name of Terry, who he just feels comfortable with. So he tells him his story and the reason why, he was essentially homeless and kind of just wandering around. And he ends up moving with Terry to London, where he's been living these past, 20 plus years. Now, the reason for his return is because his mother passed away. And we can clearly tell from that family is still important to Michael. He didn't, he's still affected by their rejection for the simple fact that despite the pain that he endured, he wanted to be there for his mother's wake and her funeral. Now, while a funeral is probably not the best place to hash out your family drama, Michael's presence is kind of an elephant in the room that can't be avoided. So the play essentially focuses on Michael and his relationship with his 2 brothers and their partners, as well as the family's relationship to their Catholic faith and, Michael's sexuality. So the play basically only has one setting, which is the family's living room, in which their mother's open casket is in for the entire play. So she's always in the background of every single conversation being had. And, it's been 20 years since his siblings last saw him, so it's a bit awkward. Now, one of the central topics of this play is, of course, family. And of course, the death of a parent is always difficult for a child. And not only have they at this point lost their mother, but before her death, her father had also passed away without Michael actually coming home. The youngest brother, whose name is Ray, is clearly the most distraught by everything. The corpse, the casket, is in his living room, and throughout the play, he constantly keeps referring to his mother, to the point that even at the end, he's still feeling like he needs to ask his mother for permission to move away to Manchester with his girlfriend Aoife, because he was very close to her and he's having a really difficult time sort of processing the death, but he's a lot more vocal about it than the other siblings. So as a way to cope, we constantly see Ray kind of cracking jokes or referring to his mother throughout the play as if she were still alive. He's kind of taken on this role of organizer because before she passed away, she kind of left a list of how she wanted her funeral arrangements and everything to be done. So he's kind of trying to keep the family in check and have them, make sure that this funeral is done as she intended for it to be. Now, while Michael and Ray are able to fall back into their relationship fairly easily, he does have tensions with his other brother, Brian, as well as his partner, Martina, and Ray's partner, Aoife. Now, it's a bit easier for him with Aoife because he and Aoife used to be very close friends. I think it's kind of implied that she had a crush on him at some point before, you know, his sexuality was known, and she ended up with Ray, with his brother. But she, you know, kind of softens up as the play goes, whereas Brian also kind of softens up, but it takes him a lot more than it did with Aoife because there's a lot of trauma going on back there. So actually, before we get into my analysis of this play, I do want to give a warning that this does talk about childhood sexual abuse and trauma and homophobia. So if those are triggering to you, I just want to put that out there as a disclaimer. But yeah, so everyone in the family kind of resents Michael because, as he put it, walking into the house was like walking into a memory. Nothing had really changed. They'd just gotten older, but they were living sort of the same lives that, you know, they had been living before because they never left this small town. Now, they kind of imagine Michael as having this wonderful, glamorous life over in London, whereas they're currently, you know, the family business is failing, and Ray is blaming himself over that because he promised their dad that he would keep the business going. And they're all just generally unhappy, and sort of seeing Michael after he hadn't come home for so long almost feels like to them that he's kind of rubbing it in their faces that, you know, he's changed because he got to leave, whereas they, you know, are kind of just stuck in this loop, I guess. As much as there is a lot to say about the resentment that the siblings and their partners feel towards Michael, there's also the presence of his father throughout the entire novel. Now, they never, of course, like flashback or anything. He never speaks, of course, because he passed away, but he does come up in a lot of the conversations. And the main thing was that he was the one who kicked Michael out, of course, and he let his pride get in the way from him ever asking Michael to come back, even though he missed him. And he never said this to Michael at all. Michael just finds out because Aoife actually lets him know that his dad regretted it his whole life, but his pride wouldn't let him come back. Now, my thing with that is just, you know, I always think it's kind of really messed up for a parent to kick their child out because of their sexuality or, you know, anything really that isn't, you know, reasonable, I guess. But, you know, I think when you become a parent, you kind of sign up for taking care of a child for the rest of your life. And I don't mean that in like a financial sense. I just mean like, you know, you're supposed to support them in everything that they do, so long as it's not, you know, illegal. So I had a really hard time with Michael's dad because of this, because he was able to admit to somebody else that he missed his son, but he still let his pride get in the way of him just being honest about his feelings and getting his son back and being able to reunite the family. And on a similar note, you know, their mother adored Michael. And when he was still in Dublin, so he went from their small town to Dublin before going to London, and she used to go visit him and everything and kind of acted like, you know, everything was fine, when obviously, you know, it wasn't. And that was really, really difficult for Michael as well. And it was also frustrating for me because, you know, I get that, especially, you know, older couples and more traditional marriages, a lot of the times women don't want to go against what their husband is saying. But again, as a parent, I think your child should always come before your partner's needs. And I wish she would have sort of put her foot down and just been like, this is our child and you can't just kick him out of the house because he's gay. That's just stupid. But she doesn't do that, and they kind of lose touch after he leaves for London. Now there's also this whole tension throughout the story with the dad regarding his siblings. So they really resent Michael for leaving because apparently he was always the favorite, and that never really changed after he left, even though, you know, he was kind of disowned and the dad didn't want to know anything about him. His brothers, especially Brian, ended up resenting him a lot because he was, you know, he was the golden child. He was good at school. He got basically like a scholarship or like a direct invitation from the seminary to go join them. And so his brothers had to spend the rest of the time when he was away trying to amount to the expectations that their dad had for Michael, but they were never good enough. And Brian himself admits that it was kind of a nightmare living with him, and that, you know, for as much as Michael could complain about like, oh, well, you guys never, you know, asked me to come home, especially after he passed away, he's also kind of ignoring the fact that his leaving did indeed leave a rupture in the family, and it changed the family dynamics, and they didn't have it easy either. And really, like, one of my biggest things with this whole, you know, the dad kicking him out was, so Michael, as I said, he meets a man named Terry just randomly while he's living in Dublin, and thankfully he was actually a kind man, and he invites him to go live in London. And Michael tells Aoife that, you know, he lived with him all these years and he loved him, you know, they ended up falling in love and everything. But the truth of the matter is not everyone gets lucky like that. And there are a lot of really awful people out there who will prey on people who are vulnerable. And I'm not just saying in the sense of like pedophiles, but also just narcissists and abusers of all types who will latch on to these young kids who've sort of been kicked out of their family. They have nowhere to go, and this puts a lot of vulnerable kids in really dangerous positions, and I think that's something that's not really considered. So while I am glad that Michael was able to be safe, it really just made me think of the fact that there are a lot of kids out there who are not as lucky and who fall into traps of abusive relationships, or, you know, they're sold or sexually abused, emotionally abused, physically abused, and that's kind of on their parents for chasing them out of their homes. And it's really heartbreaking. And it's interesting that even though it doesn't happen in the plot, it definitely gets you thinking. And of course, the other main focus of this story, aside from family, is homophobia and just the LGBT community in general. So especially in smaller towns and, you know, in very religious communities, it's very difficult often for young people to find the support that they need, and they do end up kind of getting, you know, run out of their families as well as their, you know, religious communities, and, you know, even their friends might bail on them. So they kind of lose everything and everyone at the same time, which is really, really difficult for anyone. So this play kind of looks at homophobia from two angles. So it has the family's rejection on the one hand, and then it also has internalized homophobia. So one of the characters is a priest by the name of Father Adrian Cleary. Now, Father Adrian had been in seminary with Michael, and so basically he was older than Michael, and they ended up having a at least sexual relationship, if there wasn't, you know, any type of emotional component to it. But what happened was that, so Michael gets kicked out of seminary essentially for being too gay, and Adrian stays and kind of just denies that their relationship was a thing. And he tells Michael never to contact him again, which is obviously difficult for Michael because, you know, he was very vulnerable. He was at a time where he was still kind of exploring who he was, and he got taken advantage of because Adrian wasn't ready to sort of come out. And I'm not saying that Adrian sucks as a character for, you know, not wanting to come out. I don't think that there's anything wrong with, you know, becoming a priest if you're gay, so long as, you know, you're obviously committing to the same like rules as everyone else should be. And I don't think there's anything wrong with not being ready to come out. But what I think really, really sucks, and it's a reality that happens, especially, you know, for young men who have this internalized homophobia, is that they're so scared of admitting the truth to themselves that they do end up hurting other people in the process. And that's what made me so mad, was the fact that Adrian treated Michael horrendously. And, you know, at the end he kind of goes like, oh, well, you know, it was hard, I was scared of what would happen if I didn't just suck it up and become a priest, because, you know, there's acceptance now, but there wasn't, you know, 20 years ago. And then he goes like, oh, but I'm ready now. And that makes me so mad, because essentially he tells Michael, like, I know you suffered a lot because of me. I know you spent a lot of time feeling hurt and betrayed because I wasn't ready then, but I'm ready now, and you should like take me in. After Michael kind of calls him out, and he's like, well, you just got close to my family and you stayed in this town because you knew you'd never have to see me again, because my dad had like run me out of the town and kicked me out of the family. And so it's kind of it's very sad, and it's very manipulative. And again, I think a lot of young people, when they're first coming to terms with their sexuality, they're so vulnerable that it's very easy for them to get taken advantage of and to get into toxic relationships. And while we don't know much about their relationship beyond just the fact that they slept together, it's, you know, like Michael points out that Adrian was older than him and he should have just stayed away, and that, I don't know, he just points out a lot of flaws in Adrian's character that go beyond somebody who just wasn't ready to come to terms with their sexuality, and instead kind of took advantage of Michael's youth and his vulnerability for his own pleasure, and then kind of went like, well, you gotta go face the world alone. I'm gonna kind of just force myself into becoming a priest because I don't want to come to the terms with, like, I don't want to come to terms with the fact that I'm gay. So Adrian's a handful, and I don't like him, but I think that was the point. I mean, I have moments where I'm like, I get it, you know, obviously nobody should have to come out until they're ready and everything, but it's not an excuse to play with somebody else's feelings, and just, yeah, just don't use people. If you're not ready to come out, that's fine, but don't get somebody mixed up in your own confusion and then hurt them and then be like, I'm kidding, I'm ready now 20 years later. Like, no, you didn't call, you didn't try to make amends before, and you're probably only trying now because you never thought you'd see Michael again, and here we are. And of course, lastly, we're gonna talk about the giant elephant in this room, which is the Catholic and church aspect of this play. I will say this before I actually get into the stuff that happens. I was really frustrated. I went to see this play with one of my friends, and it really frustrated me that there were no good representations of the clergy. And here's the thing. I know that for years Ireland suffered a lot, and I know that they have a lot of trauma relating to religion and Catholicism in particular. I know that a lot of people have been hurt in Ireland and outside of Ireland as well, you know, by the Catholic Church. And I am by no means trying to excuse that or defend it. I think it's disgusting. I don't think it's a representation of the faith. So I do want to say that in my analysis, I'm treating the institution and the faith as two separate things. So the institution is where all the problems are. They're human problems, men doing stuff that they shouldn't be doing to children, a lot of stuff being covered up, a lot of corruption, a lot of stuff that doesn't really embody what Catholicism is about. And then on the other hand, I'm talking about the faith in and of itself, and the fact that, you know, I know that not everybody is evil. I know that not everybody is rejecting the LGBT community or stuff like that. You know, I worked for a Catholic organization for a while, and they were doing wonderful things for, you know, people down at the border here in the States. They were serving the LGBT community in South America. So not everyone is awful, and I was kind of bothered by the fact that every single priest mentioned in this play is just awful. Because I do think it's incredibly important to acknowledge that, yes, there are a lot of problems, but I think it's also important to say, hey, not everyone is evil, and not everyone is out there to attack and hurt you. And if you are, you know, a person who's going through something and you need somebody to talk to, not every priest is evil, and not every, like, yeah, you know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, so yeah, I just wanted to say that, you know, I understand why the author chose to do this, but it did feel a bit one note to me, and I just wish there would have been a bit more of a hopeful moment in which they could at least be like, yeah, these people did really bad things, but the entire church doesn't reject you. Because there's a lot of Catholics out there with very different beliefs, and yes, some of them don't accept the LGBT community, but some of us do. But anyway, let's actually talk about what the portrayal of the church is in this story. So we have, you know, the whole stuff with Aiden. I talked about that. There's like a brief mention of another priest who's just kind of greedy and also not great at doing his job, and he's kind of mean and stuff. And I was like, well, that's unfortunate. But there's this other, so the other side of it is Brian, the older brother. So we see Brian being very hostile towards Michael the entire time, you know? There's a lot of tension there, and it feels very unexplained beyond just like, oh, your brother left and you're mad about that, and then it becomes an argument over like, oh, it was hard because dad, you know, you were still the golden child. And then we end up finding out that in the Catholic school that they went to, Brian had been molested by a priest, and this priest went and lied to their father, which ended up getting Brian in trouble. And his father, again, I just struggle with his character so much, and especially because, you know, it's all from other people's perspective, but his father ends up sending him back to the school until, you know, he's done, even though his son just told him like, hey, I'm being molested by a priest. But he stops going to church. So it's kind of like he acknowledges that, yeah, it was real, but again, his pride and his concern over what people are gonna say matters to him more than his children, and I don't like that. So yeah, that was obviously a very awful thing, and unfortunately something that happens far too often. And the reason why Brian was so hurt by Michael is because he's convinced that he did ask Michael, even though he doesn't remember ever knowing about this until, you know, until this moment. And then, you know, he felt betrayed by his brother, because he's kind of like, well, you know, not only do you not remember us having this conversation, but beyond that, you went and you joined them. And he kind of feels betrayed by his brother, and at the same time, because of his trauma, you know, he's carrying this his entire life, so he's been unable to have a normal relationship because of it, because he has a very, very difficult relationship with sex and his body and his identity and all of that. And then of course, you know, he was aware that, you know, with his brother being gay and there being a lack of information and a lack of understanding, and kind of like, you know, people who follow that idea of like, oh well, all gay people must be pedophiles, and they're not. Do want to clarify, they are not. But of course to Brian, it was like, well, my brother likes men and he's becoming a priest, so he must be doing it just for the sake of being able to hurt children like me, therefore I'm gonna resent him. And it takes a lot. There's a lot of vulnerability at the end of the story from all three brothers. You know, it's Michael admitting that he always wanted to come home, but they never welcomed him back. They never, you know, went and said, hey, it's okay, like Dad didn't want you here because of his own ideas, but we don't believe that. And you have Ray admitting that he's scared to leave, he's scared to make decisions and to move on because he's so attached to the dreams and the expectations that his parents had for him. And of course we have Brian sort of coming to terms with his reality and confessing this to his family and being very, very vulnerable. So what's it all about? At its core, Come On Home is a play about the intricacies of family and just the relationship of a lot of people have with religion. I think it's a play that exposes that there's a lot of suffering going on behind doors in a lot of homes and in a lot of religious communities. And I think it does a brilliant job at just making us realize all the things we keep to ourselves and all the secrets we hide from our families, and how sometimes we're just mad at people without them knowing why we're mad at them. And I think it's just one of those plays that really sticks with you, and it makes you think, especially those last few pages between, you know, Brian's confession and Adrian, you know, finally being ready to give Michael what he wants, and Michael taking his stand and being like, I've loved you all these years, but like, you don't deserve me. It's him finally kind of like asserting his own identity and being like, I know who I am, and I figured it out back then, or I started figuring it out back then. You're just getting started. I'm not getting mixed up in any of that. But yeah, as I said earlier, I just wish they would have made that distinction between the faith and the institution, and had somebody, I mean, I guess their mother is there to sort of represent the good, like, lay Catholic. You know, she was always praying for her children and giving to the community, cleaning up the church, doing everything she could to be a good Catholic woman. And even when her son comes out, she's still there to support him in her own way. But, you know, yeah, I do wish that there would have been just one representation of somebody who was a religious leader, who wasn't a horrible person. But I understand that there was a message being carried out, and it needed to be done this way for that reason. But yeah, I would definitely encourage you guys to go ahead and read this play. You can get it on Amazon. I don't know of any recordings, unfortunately, but I will let you know if I find one. But please leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Make sure to tell me in the comments what you think about this play, or if any of these topics kind of hit home. I know it's a very relatable play for a lot of people, I would say, which is why I wanted to touch on it. And definitely make sure to subscribe for more videos like this, and click that notification bell so you know every time I upload on Wednesdays and Sundays. I'm gonna try and get back to Sundays. I know I have been flopping at that. I'm gonna try and get back on track, and I will see you guys next time.